On our program this week, the physical, intellectual, and social differences between men and women. During the course of evolution, men and women were assigned different functions, childbearing being incumbent on women, for instance. As a result of this biological division of labor, the sexes differed physically. At first glance, these differences seem obvious, and yet, not all of them are. It is at the exact moment of fertilization that the sex of a child is determined. And this decisive moment is primarily a question of chromosomes. The nucleus of the mother's ovum and that of the father's spermatozoon each conceal 23 chromosomes. One of them is called the sex chromosome, and it comes in two shapes. In the ovum, it looks like an X. In the spermatozoon, however, it can be either in the shape of an X or that of a Y, which is much smaller. Only one spermatozoon succeeds in fertilizing the ovum. It is that spermatozoon and not the ovum that determines the embryo's sex. If the sperm cell carries an X chromosome, the embryo, becoming XX, will develop female sex organs. Conversely, if the spermatozoon that penetrates the egg carries a Y chromosome, the fertilized ovum becomes XY and will develop into a boy. Indeed, when the embryo is 6 weeks old, a gene located on the Y chromosome triggers a series of biochemical events which alter the hormonal balance and spur the development of male sexual organs. You could say that were it not for that simple gene, all human embryos would be girls. Until puberty, there are few physical differences between the sexes. Two exceptions, however: boys are slightly bigger at birth and girls grow faster. It is at the onset of puberty that female and male bodies really begin to differ. It is still not known what triggers puberty. In boys, the testes begin to secrete male sexual hormones, or androgens, the most important of which is testosterone. Testosterone has many physical and physiological effects. It is responsible for the development of the penis and testes, and for production of sperm cells by the latter. Concurrently, secondary sexual phenomena occur, such as the appearance of the beard and body hair, as well as deepening of the voice. Again, it is testosterone that is responsible for the rapid growth that occurs at that age. That growth occurs later in boys and lasts longer than in girls. It translates into more pronounced development of the muscular mass and lower limbs, which accounts for boys growing taller than girls. In addition, body fat is distributed differently in men, with most of it going to the stomach and upper part of the body. At puberty, girls' ovaries also begin to secrete sex hormones, estrogen. These hormones, whose effects are very different from testosterone, promote the development of the ovaries and uterus and trigger the first ovulations. Estrogen is also responsible for the female frame, characterized by narrower shoulders and broader hips. The female frame also differs in terms of body fat distribution, which tends to build up primarily in the buttocks and thighs. Moreover, women have roughly twice the average body fat as men. Women also produce another hormone, progesterone, during the second phase of their ovarian cycles, that is, after every ovulation. Progesterone is responsible for breast development and for triggering the menses. It should be noted, however, that women also produce small quantities of male hormones. Similarly, men produce the entire range of female hormones. Only the relative proportions of sex hormones vary between the sexes in subtle variations that are sufficient to account for most of the physical differences between men and women. Naturally, these differences are reflected in athletic performance. Men, for instance, will excel in disciplines requiring strength and speed, such as the sprint, because of their greater muscular fiber and lower limb development. On the other hand, hormonal balance promotes suppleness of joint ligaments in women. They therefore have no cause to envy men when it comes to sports requiring agility and precision, such as gymnastics. During their lives, men and women will both encounter illness. But here again, each sex has its weaknesses. For example, men run twice the risk of cardiovascular disease than women. Testosterone tends to promote the buildup of bad cholesterol on artery walls, while estrogen tends to promote good cholesterol, which cleanses the blood vessels. However, after menopause, women cease to produce estrogen, which puts them, where cardiovascular disease is concerned, just as much at risk as men. In aging, men produce less sex hormones as well, but it occurs more gradually. It is no wonder that the physical characteristics of both sexes tend to diminish with age. However, at the end of the life cycle, a final difference separates the sexes. In the industrialized nations, on the average, women live 8 years longer than men. Although intelligence is distributed equally between the sexes, this does not mean the male brain and the female brain are identical. In recent years, subtle differences have come to light between the way they are organized and the way they function. With its billions of cells, the brain is the most complex organ in the human body. And yet it is probably in this structure, no bigger than a small melon, that men and women are the most alike. A man's brain has exactly the same shape and inner structures as a woman's. And in both sexes, it seems to control the same multitude of functions with the same degree of precision. Yet recent research is questioning the similarity of male and female brains. Indeed, as a result of repeated studies, slight sexual variations related to certain brain structures and functions have come to light. For instance, on average, sensory acuity is not quite the same in men as in women. For example, a woman's sense of smell is greater than a man's. The same goes for hearing. But where sight is concerned, a man's eyes are more sensitive to light than a woman's. Could there be sexual differences in the brain? There is reason to believe that the brain is indeed responsible for these variations, since it analyzes the messages from our sensory organs, which are, it would seem, identical in both sexes. But men and women do not only differ in terms of sensory acuity, it would appear they also differ in certain intellectual abilities. For example, a number of intellectual functions have been found not to be performed on average with equal proficiency by men and women. Men, on average, perform better than women on certain spatial tasks, that is, those consisting of imagining objects and their movements in 3 dimensions. Here is an example. Observe this object. Then determine to which of the 3 following figures it corresponds. To do it, you have to be able to imagine the object rotating in space. If you are a man, you are less likely to make a mistake. For 64% of you, as opposed to 41% of women, succeed in this test. The answer is the image in the middle. However, women tend to be better than men at recalling objects and their locations within a confined space, and at comparing slightly different drawings and identifying where they differ. These differences in ability are thought to lie in different orientation strategies. Women tend to use landmarks as a strategy to orient themselves. For example, to go to her office, a woman will turn at the store, then proceed straight ahead past the church. The men, however, will create a mental map of the route and memorize the directions and distances to be covered. To reach his destination, a man knows he has to drive 5 minutes in this direction, then 10 more in that direction, and so on. Men seem to outperform women in tests of target-directed motor skills, like guiding projectiles. It is worth noting that men's superiority in this kind of test seems to have little to do with experience, since even little boys will, on average, do better than little girls. Women, on the other hand, are faster at precision manual tasks, that is, those involving fine motor coordination. Verbal functions, those that deal with language, also reveal differences between the sexes. For example, when asked to find words that begin with a specific letter, female subjects will come up with more words than the male subjects. On average, women also outperform men on other similar tasks. These differences between men and women are minimal, it's true, but they seem to be consistent and related in one way or another to the biology of our species. A number of scientists believe these differences go back to the fetal stage. During this critical period of brain development, the sex hormones produced by the fetus would permanently orient the organization of its brain. Even if, at birth, the infant ceases to produce sex hormones until puberty, his or her brain already bears the indelible mark of its sex. Some scientists believe this hormonal affect emerges in task distribution within the brain and even in its structure. For example, it was discovered that the back part of the corpus callosum, a major neural system connecting the two hemispheres of the brain, was larger in women than in men. Since it's the corpus callosum that ensures communication between the two hemispheres, it may be that they communicate more fully in women. If true, this might enhance women's ability to perform certain complex tasks, such as intuiting and interpreting the feelings of others. This latter ability, reminiscent of feminine intuition, does indeed seem more developed in women than in men. However, these are but hypotheses, and it is a known fact that the environment in which people evolve plays a determining role in the development of their brain. It is therefore very difficult to say whether the differences in ability observed between men and women are the product of their genes or their social environment. Being a woman or being a man is something that begins at birth. From the moment the blue or pink label goes on the cradle, social influences soon guide the destinies of both sexes down two very different paths. Girl or boy? For most parents, the birth of a child is the most extraordinary event in their lives. Regardless of its sex, their child will be a constant source of wonder and joy. And yet, from the moment of birth, part of a child's destiny is already predetermined. Slowly but surely, their sex will take boys and girls down divergent paths. It is not known whether biological sex has a part in the social role people will play during their lives. However, we do know that culture and social environment do. Regardless of sex, the paths of human development are remarkably similar from birth to death. Except for the fact that girl infants seem to smile more spontaneously, until school age, the psycho-emotional development of girls and boys is virtually identical. Between 1 and 2 years, both sexes prefer to play on their own or in parallel, games that involve little social activity. Put in a group, they even tend to fight. At 3, however, children of both sexes display more social, physical, and intellectual abilities, able to take the feelings and reactions of others into account, and therefore to cooperate. They begin to seek out playing companions. At that age, boys and girls are interested in the same games, whether considered masculine or feminine. However, their psychosocial profile is beginning to differ. For example, it has been observed that between 2 and 3, boys are more daring physically and express greater aggressiveness than girls. However, girls begin talking earlier. It must be said that whether subconsciously or consciously, parents transmit to their child their own idea of what is acceptable social behavior for their sex. Girls will be encouraged to be sociable and understanding, and boys to be reckless and have confidence in themselves. In addition, at this age, the child strongly identifies with the parent of the same sex, tries to imitate him or her. Parents will often admit that they treat their children differently, punishing their boys more severely, for instance. At school, the socialization of children occurs at the same rate in both sexes. From about 7 to 13, the contacts, less physical and more verbal, occur mainly with other children of the same sex. While they distance themselves from their parents, children will look for role models, sexual or not, around them. Their activities and behavior thus continue to differ. Adolescence is both a time of identity searching and of reconciliation between the sexes. The sexual changes teenagers undergo help them to discover their sexuality, but these changes are also a source of anxiety for them about their appearance and place in society. Teenagers, boys and girls, partially solve the problem by identifying with a peer group that confirms their sense of social belonging. They also seek, through such means as clothing, to express their individuality, rebel against parental authority, and prove they are ready for sexual encounters. This is the advent of masculinity and femininity. However, because of their anxiety, teenagers are inclined to readily embrace advertising and media trends, as well as sexual stereotypes. Society would impose a multitude of codes on them, some of which seek only to separate the boys from the girls and to magnify their differences. For example, aggressive assertiveness, just about unavoidable during adolescence, leads to physical violence more often in boys than in girls. Tests have shown that boys also tend to develop more risk-taking behaviors. These differences have long-term effects, for it is believed they account in part for women's longer life expectancy. As they exit the teenage years, young adults will have to choose a career. Without knowing it, their choice has already been made, in part, by sex. Indeed, just about every society practices a form of division of labor between the sexes. However, the criteria of this separation seem purely arbitrary, bearing no relation to differences in physical or psychological ability. For example, in many parts of the world, women perform the most physically demanding work. Even if it is generally acknowledged they are not as strong as men. Similarly, in ancient cultures, the making of plant-based remedies and medicine in general were feminine callings. Until recently, in Europe and in North America, medicine had become an almost exclusively male preserve. In many, but not all societies, it is men who dominate the professional ladder for equal work and qualifications, unequal pay. These are the vestiges of a rigid social model in which a person's fate is sealed according to an accident of birth. It is only very recently that modern society has begun to ascribe social roles not based on sex or any other arbitrary criterion, but rather on the capabilities, interests, and achievements of the individual. Most of the barriers created between the sexes are purely arbitrary. While there is little we can do about the biological roles of the sexes, their social definition, on the other hand, depends only on us.